Rely back.
Okay.
All right. All right, folks. Well, thanks for getting this going. So today's podcast, what we want to talk about is about the industry of physical therapy. Like it's a fascinating industry because musculoskeletal health needs are increasing across the board. It's one of the fastest growing needs in the country, probably even globally, right? But the problem is there's a bit of a misalignment between the growth of the needs of the population and the ability to provide care for that need. Um, what's happening now in the industry in general is you have individuals coming out of physical therapy programs with a doctor of physical therapy. They've obviously invested a significant amount of money to get that degree. When they go out into the world, into the physical therapy world, and they're confronted with a couple of different options to pursue their careers. They can join facilities that are insurance based, or now the growth seems to be a lot in cash based facilities. But the primary avenue of growth or employment for most physical therapists is at insurance based facilities because of the sheer volume of those. And what they're finding is that it's a grueling week of work because they only get to deal with the patient for 20 minutes of the hour the patient is there. And they have to do this on the hour, every hour for 8 hours a day. And they also have to do documentation. So it seems that the quality of life for a physical therapist is not as great as it should be or could be. Patients are not getting the best quality of care because simply access to a physical therapist is limited, especially in an insurance-based type of model. And then the other part of the equation is that the physical therapists themselves are not getting compensated at a level you would expect them to get compensated for based on the amount they spent on their degrees. Now, Daniel, you're from the insurance-based physical therapy world. Can you kind of give us a quick oversight or overview of what you're seeing from your perspective in terms of your colleagues, your mentees that are coming into the industry or have been in the industry, and how are they dealing with these difficulties that are out there right now?
Yeah, it's a changing landscape right now. I think kind of overarching everything, there have been some cuts in the last couple of years from Medicare, which then tends to act as kind of a marker for the rest of the insurance marketplace. I believe they went down like 3% from 2023 to 2024, and maybe another 3% from 2024 to 2025. So we're seeing declining reimbursements from Medicare and then across the board from other insurance companies as well as cost of education and cost of living is going up for PTs, which makes it really tricky for the smaller businesses in an insurance-based physical therapy clinic to stay afloat. So certainly some challenges there and some changes overarching the whole thing that's kind of driving everything. And then it just leaves people feeling maybe a little bit on edge, trying to figure out how they can continue to stay afloat as a clinic, which leads to what you had mentioned of trying to get more patients in the door and maybe spending less quality time with that patient, which I think at the end of the day is what most physical therapists want to do. They want to. Most of us got into this field because we really care about helping people and wanting to really have a unique kind of personal relationship and understanding them and their needs and being able to be a part of their healing journey. And that gets a lot trickier when you're treating 2, 3 patients an hour. So you see a lot of people coming out of PT school, getting their feet wet in that kind of scenario, and then saying, "Oh man, I don't know that I can do this for too much longer in this kind of world." So then they back out either to some are pivoting to Pilates instructors and personal trainers, and especially here in Los Angeles, that some people can charge a premium for those kinds of services and make more than they could even with their doctorate. So we're seeing some people pivot that way. Granted, I think a lot of my mentors in physical therapy and the people in our clinic still are finding ways to really cultivate a really good environment, um, and still find the love in it. I don't want to paint a picture that it's all hard and sad, and I think we still have really amazing jobs and really amazing kind of day-to-day lives as medical uh, providers, where we do get a decent amount of time with our patients still. So changing landscape, but it's not all bad.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think one of the areas of change in the industry is technology, and I think technology is playing an interesting role in physical therapy. It's providing avenues for physical therapists to deliver therapy remotely at home. It's providing increasingly interesting tools for therapists in the clinic to provide more accurate care. It in some ways sort of enlivens the environment, gives them new avenues of growth personally and intellectually, and finding better ways to improve outcomes. I think most physical therapists, their main desire is to make people feel better, move better. And I think quantification of movement is the next frontier in some ways, and maybe that's part of the equation of helping to change the economy of a physical therapy clinic. Shayna, you've been on the tech side for a while. How do you kind of see this evolution of technology out there in terms of its impact on physical therapy clinics and how they're potentially dealing with patients? And could that potentially over time change the economics of a physical therapy clinic?
Yeah, I mean, I think technology has a huge potential in the PT space. I mean, even looking at my background, which is sports, the PTs were heavily involved in the adoption of technology within their organization. And thankfully, it's becoming a lot more accessible. Equipment's becoming a lot cheaper, and PT clinics are now able to own these things themselves. Um, so I think there's definitely a space for it and potentially can help more help physical therapists have a better understanding of their client in a faster way when they come into the clinic, and then help their client. I mean, it's also a whole education side too, right? It helps their client understand what they're doing. It helps the client buy in more to what the physical therapist is prescribing them, because we can tell you exactly, hey, you're deficient in XYZ. I want you to do XYZ exercises because we know that helps this sort of deficiency.
Yeah, for sure. And I kind of wonder with if you look at the economics of a physical therapy clinic, and Daniel, you're knee deep in technology. Um, Clinics are always looking for ways to potentially add more revenue to their roster. And if you're a clinic that's based on insurance-based customers, you're very capped in what you can potentially charge a customer. So your revenue flow is capped on literally the amount of space you have, the number of of clients you can see. But with technology, it seems like you have an avenue to pursue additional revenue streams that perhaps weren't present in the past. Daniel, you're on the cutting edge of using technology for return to play. Are you seeing technology as a sort of a bridge for insurance-based clinics to start to find additional revenue sources, and not just for the sake of finding additional revenue sources, but really for the sake of getting better outcomes?
Yeah, yes to both. I think there's a couple different ways, as Shayna touched on, all the myriad of ways that the tech that we're using in our clinic and people are starting to use across the board can help our patients. But um, at the end of the day, you're right that if we want to bring in some tech, even though it is cheaper, we got to find ways to have it pay for itself. And there's a bunch of different ways that people are starting to do this. One, you mentioned return to sport tests and musculoskeletal screenings are ways that now you have portable force plates and portable dynamometers or easy motion capture systems via iPhones and stuff. You could take that into a sports club. Say, I'm going to test all these your athletes a couple times a year and be able to charge a fairly reasonable price per kid in youth sports, and be able to try to track some risk factors and some performance metrics for the coaches, for the athletes. One, to try to make enough money from the screenings themselves to make them pay for themselves, but also just as ways to get physical therapists outside of the clinic, to get them into the community and into maybe this more preventative role, where some of our best tools out there are neuromuscular warm-up programs that coaches can implement with their teams. If we can go out and teach these programs and these coaches how to implement some of this stuff, or maybe flag the one or two kids that actually do need to come into a clinic to address an injury, it's absolutely leading to better outcomes. So that's one possible avenue. Another thing we're looking at in tech takes from the same player tracking concepts that we've gotten from people like Shayna and the sports scientists out there, and Tim Gabbett's research on workload monitoring. Is if you can track people's workload fairly consistently, there's a chance to maybe follow up with them remotely and catch an injury before it happens, or have a little check-in um, on just your workload, and advise how to ramp up throughout a season for athletes, but also just for anybody. Those same workload um, metrics and principles apply to everyone, increasing their amount they're walking or running or any movement that they do. When telehealth first kind of came on the scene in mostly around the pandemic in 2020, I personally was not a fan at all. I was like, I don't want to sit on Zoom and try to analyze this person's squat and all this kind of stuff. It was a pain in the butt, and I didn't feel like we were any good at it. And now that we've had several years to practice this and implement, oh shoot, what is your smartwatch telling you that maybe we can get information on, or can I do some better analysis even remotely, that we can now, I feel much more confident taking a telehealth call with the patient, and being able to monitor them with their outside the clinic.
Yeah, so it's interesting. The technology is allowing clinicians to get outside the clinic to reach the community. It's also providing avenues to do remote health, and we'll have to probably do another session on reimbursement, because I'm sure that dictates a lot of what you can and can't do. But for today's conversation, I wanted to segue a little bit into the rising, I guess, genre of private pay physical therapy or cash-based physical therapy. Shayna, you've been around other cash pay businesses and might have some perspective on this. What are you hearing from physical therapists that are participating in cash-based clinics, and why are they liking it or not liking it?
Yeah, I mean, from the physical therapists I've talked to who are in a cash pay clinic, I mean, A, obviously they get paid more, which is always appealing to them, but B, they can provide better care because they don't have to fit within the constraints of what insurance is telling them they can versus can't do. A lot of times when you go into an insurance-based clinic, they're like, okay, your knee's hurting. The physical therapist is only allowed to focus on the knee. Whereas in a cash pay clinic, they're able to say, oh, your knee's hurting. Well, let me see what your hip and your ankle are doing to see if that is contributing to your knee pain at all. So it's a more holistic approach on the person rather than focusing on specifically the injury, which I think is appealing to a lot of physical therapists because, like Daniel was saying before, a lot of people get into this practice because they want to help people, and helping people a lot of times is understanding the whole person and not just putting them into a bucket of your knees hurting.
Yeah, no, very well put. Daniel, I mean, you're in a insurance-based facility. You probably are also constrained by time to see a patient. Have you have you felt the desire or the need to look at potentially entering a cash-based facility, or maybe are your colleagues really looking at that, especially the younger generation that's coming out of school right now? Do you feel like their bent of mind is more towards these cash-based facilities that are predominantly in major metropolitan areas like LA and San Francisco and New York, et cetera, but you probably aren't going to find that in a non-cosmopolitan area. But in those situations, do you find more of your colleagues, past, present, looking in that avenue or that area more now than in the past?
Yeah, certainly. I do think it's a growing area and growing interest for a lot of PTs. As Shayna said, if you tell me I'm a PT and I can go down to treating one patient an hour and put as much quality and care and thoughtfulness into that and get paid the same amount as treating 3 patients an hour, people love that. I do think there's a caveat to that. Like you said, one real struggle for the physical therapy market in general is serving rural areas, serving underserved areas. Um, and the cash pay physical therapy clinics aren't going to be everywhere. And maybe that's just me coming from a poorer state in New Mexico as opposed to California and Los Angeles, that there's always going to be a place for insurance-based physical therapy, and people across the board are going to be hurt and needing our services. So I do think that it's still going to be a strong presence in insurance forever, but you're right. There's much more of a push towards that cash model for a lot of PTs in metropolitan areas and populations that can afford a higher quality of care, or maybe if I'm a patient and I'm really committed to my physical therapy journey, and I really want a high quality physical therapist who can spend a lot of time with me, and then I only go in there once, I pay a bunch more than I might with insurance, and then I really commit to doing all my exercises and being really careful about it for the next month, and I check in, once every 3 weeks instead of going in for little 20-minute sessions multiple times a week. Then that might be an avenue for patients to be able to afford that as well. I do think that the cash pay model, as we start to see just rise in personal training and other things, charging similar amounts is certainly increasing.
So this brings me to my last question, and that's the DPT degree. And I'm not sure if you want to dip your toes into this because you're obviously from one of the better schools in the country, USC, and you've done your Doctor of Physical Therapy. Um, in the past, you didn't need a Doctor of Physical Therapy to practice medicine, and this has been something that's just come about in the last 10 odd years, I'm guessing, probably maybe give or take a few years. And it's really added to the cost of education. If you dare dip your toes in this area, do you think that the model of having a DPT is necessary, or should the industry look at going back to the need just to have a master's to practice physical therapy?
I still love it. I understand that there's some criticism around how expensive the doctorate of physical therapy has gotten, and that's certainly well warranted. However, I think at least I can only speak on the program that I went to at USC, provided really phenomenal education that I think was 100% worth it for me. I would absolutely do the same thing if I could do it all over again. And I think that doctorate has opened up the door to provide direct access to patients where legally physical therapists can see a patient without a script from a physician. Usually there's some stipulations around that, seeing them for 12 visits or 45 days, or making the necessary referrals when needed. And it doesn't happen to us every single time we see a direct access patient, but every once in a while we'll have someone come in, and because of that doctorate level education, we're screening for things that you wouldn't expect a physical therapist to typically be dealing with, and we're thinking about different, screening for bone cancers, or screening for metabolic diseases, or all kinds of different stuff that would warrant this person not appropriate for physical therapy, to where we should send them back to a physician. And I think that rising level of education in a doctorate program is really critical for allowing physical therapists to treat people safely. You're not going to come across it very often, but the 1% of the time you do come across something that's kind of scary or kind of dangerous, where they're not appropriate for PT. I'm really grateful I had that education and have that doctorate to be able to say, hey, you know what, you're not the best candidate for this right now. You need to go see someone else.
Yeah, that's fascinating perspective, Daniel. In some ways, you're suggesting that the doctor of physical therapy has allowed physical therapists to see patients directly, and in some ways ushered in the idea of having concierge physical therapy and cash-based physical therapy, because without the DPT, you couldn't do this. But with the DPT, now you're accredited as being a real doctor of physical therapy to see a patient who needs help. And in some ways, it's opened up the field, as you said, to see the full human body in any way possible that's best for the patient. Um, and I think it really comes down to the economics then of how do you create sustainable cash-based facilities across the country so that it's not just available to the 1%, but potentially to a wider swath of the audience. Um, I think, if you think about the cash pay model, uh, the drawback is potentially the cost, which could cost anywhere from 150 to $400 per session, depending on the physical therapist you go to see or the brand that you go to. I'm wondering the role of a physical therapy assistant, both in an insurance-based facility and in a cash-based facility. So in a cash-based facility, it's a one-on-one consultation. You're with the physical therapist for the entire hour, which obviously drives up the cost. I'm wondering if we can find ways to mediate that time spent with the physical therapist with a really good physical therapy aid. So obviously you're in the insurance-based world. When you hand a patient off to a physical therapy aid, as a PTA, or I spell physical therapy aid, right?
Yeah, Nate.
If they're super good at what they do, that makes your job a lot easier, and the transition and the quality of care patient gets to be a lot better. What's your perspective on the physical therapy aid right now across the industry? Do you think they're they're given the education and knowledge base that they need to be really effective second lieutenants to a physical therapist?
Yeah, they absolutely can be, and that's the reason that our clinic that I work under can be as successful as it can be, because we put a lot of time and effort into education for our aides, and we host in services for them and teach them across the way. And the way that always is going to go is that by the time we teach them how to be really good and really effective, and then they're usually off to go to the doctorate program of their own, or sometimes they're doing masters or doctorates in athletic training or other things, because they tend to be a little younger, out of undergrad, spend either that time in undergrad or a year after to working for a little while, getting their feet wet and learning some of the industry, and then they go off to do their own education. And that's incredibly effective at our PT clinic, because we've taken some time to train them to kind of be our second set of eyes and ears. However, it requires a lot of effort. Every year we're going to get a new batch of students coming in that we got to train up again. And you had mentioned, so that's the aid, or some people might call them a PT tech side of things. And then you had also mentioned physical therapy assistants, which is a whole nother associate's degree and license program that can see patients under the supervision of physical therapists. We personally, I don't want to speak on that too much, just because I don't know as many of the rules around PTAs. And I've come across some really, really effective PTAs out there who are doing really amazing things, and really thoughtful and smart PTAs who can deliver really high quality care. Like any profession, you're gonna find good ones, you're gonna find bad ones, like PTs, like PTAs, like chiropractors, like everybody out there. Good ones and bad ones, but certainly different models for being able to have your support staff around you and your colleagues be able to elevate your quality of care as a clinic, whether that's really training up your aides or your PTAs so you're all on the same page.
Yeah, no, interesting perspective. So I guess parting thoughts, Shane and Daniel, where are you optimistic about the industry and where it's headed, or do you see significant changes down the road? Shane, do you want to go first? Then maybe Daniel, you can wrap it up for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a bunch of different potentials, especially with technology entering the space in terms of like freeing up PT's time, giving them more objective data, leading to better care. Um, I think that's huge and has already kind of kickstarted, which is great. Yeah.
Shayna, Daniel, last thoughts?
Yeah, I'm still, as much as we might speculate about the future of reimbursements or other things, I'm still incredibly optimistic, and I absolutely love what I do, and I want to treat patients and help people forever. So I think it's an amazing industry, and things like tech that can free up our time for documentation or testing more efficiently and stuff like that are certainly helping us along the way. And having more time for, maybe I'm just a softy about this stuff, but having more time for that personal connection with your patients and your people, and knowing them as a community, I don't think that that's replaceable. I think tech can certainly help us along the way, but that personal touch and personal relationship that we end up having with our clients is why I still love what I do and why I want to do it forever.
And I think we need more Daniels in this world. Just imagine the world full of Daniel PTs.
Absolutely.
Great, man. Makes it
Alrighty,
fun.
guys. Well, this has been fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ashmedh.